I was bullied by the school bully Dan for a year. When my head was pressed hard into the sewage pool, an expression of pleasure that was even ferocious appeared on his face. I don't know why he targeted me. Until one day, I saw a pocket watch hanging around his neck, which he treasured very much. Inside, there is a photo of my mother and him. Only then did I realize that he was my half-brother. He was also the son my mother gave up on out of great disappointment. He bullies me because he hates me. When I got home that night, I no longer covered the scars on my arms. Under my mother's concerned questioning, I felt very wronged. Someone at school is bullying me, Mom. Can you go and support me? Welcome to the best stories. Don't forget to like and always love yourself. Now, let's dive into the tale. Chapter 1. Ding Ling Ling. As soon as the school bell rang, I couldn't help but tremble. The next second the teacher left the classroom, I grabbed my school bag and ran out of the classroom. But he was still caught under the teaching building. When a few lazy boys saw me, their eyes lit up. Brother Chung was right. This bitch is really going to run away. My whole body was shaking and I subconsciously turned around to run. But as soon as I turned around, someone grabbed me by the collar. I smelled a faint scent of cigarette smoke on that person. It's Dan. He was the main cause of the school bullying I suffered in the past year. It's over. Despair welled up in my heart. Soon, I was dragged to the top floor by several people. There are no classrooms on this floor, only an abandoned toilet. This is the lawless place where they bully me. I have never understood why so many people focused on me. This middle school is divided into junior high school and high school. I have just entered the first grade of junior high school this year, and he is already the second grade of high school. I couldn't understand why such an ordinary me could be so annoying to him. From the first day I entered school, he appeared in my sight. He just stood outside the classroom looking at me with a sinister look. His eyes were like those of a poisonous snake, eyeing a delicious prey. When bullying me, he would even have a look of pleasure and ferociousness on his face.
Bang!
I was pushed hard into the toilet. His body hit the old door, and his arms went numb. Didn't I tell you to come up after school? A boy raised his hand and slapped me on the head. Why the hell are you running? Seeing that I didn't say anything, he slapped me in the face again. These people are Dan's followers. He is also his thug. I clenched my fists and spoke with difficulty. Today is my mother's birthday. I want to go back and celebrate her birthday. I was so scared that I didn't notice that Dan, who had been leaning against the wall with an expressionless face, suddenly looked gloomy when he heard what I said. He walked over quickly and pushed the boy standing in front of me away. But he is very tall and very strong. He grabbed me by the collar, forcing me to stand on tiptoes to look at him. Dan gnashed his teeth. Who do you think you are? The corners of his eyes trembled slightly and his breathing was unstable, as if he was trying hard to endure something. Before I could figure out why he suddenly got angry, he carried me to the sink. The water in the pool is dirty and smelly, and it hasn't been changed for hundreds of years. Dan pushed my head into the pool without any hesitation. A feeling of suffocation came over me, and I struggled frantically. I have a feeling Dan really wants to kill me. Why on earth? I waved my hands around, trying to grab anything I could. In the struggle, my hands grabbed Dan's clothes. Her fingers hooked around the chain around his neck. You bitch. Don't let go. Someone came up and pulled my hands apart, but I also broke the chain in the process. There was a sound of metal falling to the ground. Dan woke up as if from a dream and suddenly let go of his hand. I sat down on the ground exhausted, breathing in deep gulps of fresh air. When I came to my senses, I found that Dan was lying on the ground looking for something, which was unusual for him. He looked flustered, and his hands were shaking. Where's the stuff? Where's the stuff? Find it for me now, he roared. The stunned brothers around also reacted quickly and started squatting on the ground to look for it. I looked at their abnormal appearance. My fingers curled slightly and accidentally touched something. I turned my head to look and saw that it was an exquisite pocket watch that had been broken. Inside the pocket watch was an old photo, a little blurry, but my pupils still jumped because I recognized the person above. My mom. Before he could get a closer look, the pocket watch was grabbed by Dan. He held the pocket watch carefully and wiped it again and again with the brand name clothes he was wearing. Treat it as a treasure. It's broken. The pocket watch is broken, he murmured in a daze, then turned around and walked out quickly.
Dan?
A boy asked in confusion. What about this bitch? Whatever. Dan was thinking about the pocket watch. I'm going to get my pocket watch repaired. Don't contact me if it's not important. Chapter 2. Thanks to that pocket watch, I was able to go home early today, which is a rare occasion. On the way home, a cold wind was blowing. My clothes were already half wet, and now it felt even colder. But I didn't feel anything because my mind was in a mess. Whenever I close my eyes, I can think of the photo in my pocket watch. That gentle and beautiful woman is my mother. My mother when she was young. And what about the little boy she was holding? Is that Dan? What is their relationship? I always knew that my mother had been divorced once and had a child. I am the child born after my mother and father remarried. My parents never hid this from me. But I can't connect Dan with my mother's previous child. But if Dan is really my half-brother, then all the questions I have had can be answered. Why would he target me and bully me? He hates me because he was abandoned by his mother. Why did he threaten me and stop me from telling my family after bullying me? He also said that his family was powerful and would easily shut down the flower shop my mother opened. Because he was afraid that I would tell my mother. He is afraid that his mother knows that he is bullying me. The more I thought about it, the more frightened I became, and my heart started beating uncontrollably fast. I started running. The cold wind made me more awake. I have to ask my mom for confirmation. It was supposed to be a 20-minute journey, but I ran home in just 10 minutes. When my mother saw me coming back, she was a little surprised. You're back so early today? Dan bullied me every day. In order not to make my mother worry, I lied and said I was studying at school. In order to prevent my mother from noticing anything, I would pull down my long sleeves to cover the scars on my arms every time I went home. Mom stepped out of the kitchen, still wearing her apron, and smiled at me. Go wash your hands, sweetie. Dinner's almost ready. Her gaze lingered on my damp hair for a moment. Why is your hair and clothes a little wet? She asked, a hint of concern in her voice. A stranger was throwing water on the roadside and accidentally splashed me. Then go take a shower and don't catch a cold. I nodded, set down my school bag, grabbed some clean clothes from the bedroom, and took a shower. When I came out, Mom had already prepared dinner. Dad was away on a business trip, so it was just the two of us. Sitting at the dining table, I looked at my mom's gentle face and hesitated before speaking. Mom, can I ask you something? She placed a chicken drumstick in my bowl, smiling softly. Eat up while it's hot. What's on your mind? I hesitated a bit longer but finally asked, Mom, do I have a brother? What's his name? Mom's hand paused midair, the smile on her face fading. Why do you ask? I'm just a little curious, I replied. The rest of the meal was unusually quiet. Mom barely touched her food, and I started to regret bringing it up. I hadn't meant to make her so upset. After dinner, Mom called me into her room. She handed me a photograph, her expression somber. His name is Dan. He was my first child. My hands trembled as I took the photo. It was identical to the one in Dan's pocket watch. Chapter 3. Abby's POV. Abby hadn't thought about the child in years. To her, it was as if he had never existed. If her daughter hadn't mentioned him today, he might have stayed buried in the past, along with the memories of her failed first marriage. She should have ended it when her husband began staying out all night, but she had foolishly given him chance after chance. Each time, he tested her limits further, coming home smelling of other women's perfume, blatantly taking his lover on business trips. Abby was heartbroken, but she clung to the hope that her son would always stand by her. She was wrong. Despite all the love and patience she poured into Dan, he still betrayed her. She overheard him one day, holding another woman's hand and calling her Mom. He said his real mother was sloppy, annoying, always trying to control him, and that he wanted the beautiful and gentle auntie as his mother instead. That was the final straw. Abby realized that Dan, just like his father, was ungrateful. During the divorce, she gave up custody of Dan, focusing solely on securing the best outcome for herself. She still remembered the day she moved out. Her husband looked relieved, and little Dan was ecstatic, cheering, "Now I can have a new mom. This is great." Those words felt like thorns piercing Abby's heart, cutting off any lingering affection she had for her son. Chapter 4. After hearing my mother's story, I gently placed the photo on the table. "Mom," I said softly, tugging at her hand. When she looked at me, I rolled up my sleeve, revealing bruises of various sizes on my arms. Her face paled as she grabbed my hand. "What happened? Did someone hurt you?" Suppressing my tears, I nodded slowly. "Mom, someone's been bullying me at school. Can you come with me tomorrow?" The next morning at school, my deskmate scooted his desk away from mine. When I arrived, I found my desk overturned, books scattered on the floor, covered in dirty footprints. My classmates avoided my gaze, pretending not to notice. Dan had taken his revenge. After the first class, a friend followed me to the bathroom. Melody, what did you do to Dan? I heard you broke something he really loved. Is he just using that as an excuse to bully you? I stayed silent, and she took it as confirmation. That's awful. Why don't you tell the teacher? Her suggestion caught me off guard. Tell the teacher? I tried before, but they either dismissed it as kids being kids or brushed it off once they heard Dan's name. After all, his father had funded the school's laboratory building. No one wanted to deal with Dan. That evening after school, Dan and his crew cornered me again. His mood was visibly dark, and I noticed the pocket watch was missing from around his neck. The repair must not have gone well, I thought grimly. Was he here to punish me for that? My friend, brave but still just a kid, watched from the corridor, too scared to intervene. She hesitated for a long time before squatting down in frustration. Suddenly, a pair of high heels appeared before her. She looked up to see a pretty, gentle woman. Excuse me, have you seen Melody? I'm here to take her home. Chapter 5. Dan shoved me into an abandoned restroom, where I tripped over a broken mop stick and fell hard. My face scraped against some tiles, and I felt a sharp pain. When I sat up, I noticed my hands were trembling, afraid to touch my face. Dan seemed even more panicked than I was. He squatted down, staring at the scratch on my face. You scratched your face? He muttered. He always avoided hitting my face before. Gripping my shoulders, he barked. You know what to say when you get home, right? You fell. Got it. I ignored him, my gaze fixed on the door. His lackeys, crowded at the entrance, didn't notice when someone new arrived. I looked up to see my mom standing there, frozen in shock. Mom, it hurts. I whimpered, my voice trembling. In an instant, she pushed past the boys and rushed to me, wrapping me in her arms. Mom's here. Don't be afraid, Melody. I'm here for you. Tears welled up as she examined the cut on my face. I'm sorry, I should have come sooner. I huddled in her embrace, stealing a glance at Dan, whose face had gone blank. My mom's gaze shifted to him, and he quickly averted his eyes, looking almost ashamed. Then, something seemed to click in my mom's mind. She looked at Dan with a mix of recognition and disbelief. Dan squirmed under her intense stare, eventually turning to leave. But Mom wasn't about to let him off that easily. She grabbed his shirt, stopping him in his tracks. Where do you think you're going? You think you can just walk away after doing this to my daughter? Dan's POV. Dan stared at the woman who hadn't changed much from his memories. He opened his mouth to speak, but couldn't find the words. His mind flashed back to when he was just 5 years old. His mom had taken him to the playground, and some older kids had pushed him down. She'd picked him up, soothed him, and then marched over to confront the kids and their parents. He remembered how safe he'd felt in her arms, thinking she was like a warrior, invincible and always protecting him. But in the end, he'd hurt her the most. He'd been swayed by the pretty auntie, who told him that his mom wasn't elegant or graceful, that she embarrassed him. Little Dan had believed her when she said a good mother wouldn't scold him, but would spoil him with candy and fulfill his every wish. He'd thought the auntie was the best mother in the world. He didn't understand why his mom looked so heartbroken when she left, or why the auntie became a completely different person after moving in. He thought his mom would come back one day, but now he realized she never would. She had another child, one she wouldn't even recognize him for. Chapter 6. Dan remained silent as a teacher's voice brought him back to reality. They called his homeroom teacher, and soon, we were all marched to the school infirmary. The cut isn't deep, no need for stitches, the doctor said as she treated my wound. Don't worry, it won't leave a scar. When I stepped out, my mom was in full force, pointing at Dan and demanding to know who his parents were. Where are they? Call them here right now, she shouted. Dan's teacher, trying to defuse the situation, approached my mom. Please, let's not make a scene. Dan's parents are very busy. Perhaps we can settle this privately? Mom's expression faltered. She turned to the teacher, her voice thick with disbelief. What's his name? Dan, the teacher replied, relieved, thinking the mention of Dan's influential father would calm things down. His father, Mr. Smith, works in real estate. Mom's hand tightened around mine, trembling as she stared at Dan. He finally looked up, meeting her gaze with a mix of guilt and confusion. She let go of my hand and began walking toward him. Her steps grew faster, her emotions spiraling. Dan instinctively stepped forward, as if expecting her to embrace him. But instead, she slapped him. The sound echoed in the room, leaving everyone stunned. Before anyone could react, she slapped him again. The teachers hurried over, their faces pale. They were more afraid that Dan might retaliate, making things even worse. But Dan didn't move, didn't fight back. He just stood there, taking it. The teachers pulled my mom away, and the head teacher, terrified by the mark on Dan's face, quickly asked for an ice pack. Mom finally calmed down, her voice icy as she said, "Call his parents, or I'll call the police." The head teacher had called more than a dozen times, but every time, Dan's father's secretary answered. His father was a very busy man, too occupied to deal with trivial matters like this. In the end, it was Dan's mother who showed up. She was the epitome of elegance, from head to toe. With a perfectly maintained face, she looked no older than 30. She took off her sunglasses and smiled at my mom. "Hi, I'm Dan's mom, Bunny." Abby recognized Bunny immediately. The little girl who used to call her sister had shed her youthful innocence and blossomed into a confident woman. Abby had been there from the beginning, helping James build his business, handling everything, big and small. When the company began to thrive and life became more comfortable, Abby found out she was pregnant. James insisted she rest at home, bringing in new hires to take over her responsibilities. Bunny was one of them, a college student at the time. Bunny often shadowed Abby, diligently taking notes and learning the ropes. Under Abby's guidance, she became proficient in handling company affairs. After graduating, Bunny naturally joined James' company as his secretary. Even then, Abby still treated her like a younger sister, inviting her over for dinner often. But when Dan was 3 years old, Abby started noticing things. The scent of a woman's perfume clung to her husband, and his business trips became more frequent. And Bunny was always by his side. Abby wasn't naive. It didn't take much digging to uncover the affair. She had thought about divorce many times, but couldn't bring herself to do it because of Dan. She endured countless sleepless nights, convincing herself to stay in the marriage for her child's sake. But as Dan grew older, Abby noticed something that broke her. Her beloved son had become attached to Bunny, the very woman who had betrayed her. That was the final straw. Abby decided to leave. Bunny, too, recognized Abby. She paused for a moment, then a smug smile curled her lips. "Long time no see." While they were talking inside, Dan and I were sent out into the corridor. I noticed a flicker of disgust on Dan's face when he looked at Bunny. We stood in silence for a moment before he finally spoke. "You must be feeling pretty proud of yourself, huh? What are you talking about?" I blinked at him, genuinely confused. "Don't play dumb," he muttered angrily, careful to keep his voice down. "You just wanted her to see this, didn't you? Don't act all innocent, Melody. You're so proud of yourself." I looked at him, amused. "Oh, so you're saying I should be proud that I have a great mom?" His expression darkened, and I couldn't help but smile wider. "Of course I'm proud. My mom is amazing. She cooks delicious meals, tucks me in at night, takes me on trips, and even makes me bouquets of flowers." "Shut up," Dan hissed, his eyes reddening. "She used to do all that for me too, you know? Do you think you're special? Then how did you lose her?" I shot back, my voice calm. "You haven't even called her mom in a long time. So why are you barking at me like a dog?" "You." Dan's face flushed with anger, but he didn't dare hit me, knowing my mom could see us from the office. I wasn't afraid of him now. I had someone backing me up. I stared him down. "You know what? I was wrong. It's not that you lost her. She just doesn't want you anymore." Dan's eyes filled with tears at my words. I was surprised, watching him quickly turn away to wipe them. The teacher, who had been watching us from a distance, noticed the tension and hurried over to coax Dan away to another office. My mother spoke with Bunny for a while, then came out and walked straight over to me. "Let's go home," she said, taking my hand. I didn't know what conclusion they had reached, but I was confident my mother wouldn't let me suffer any loss. When we got to the school parking lot, our car was blocked by a van, and we couldn't get out right away. Mom called the number on the van to have it moved. While we waited, I noticed a luxury car parked next to us. The driver was nearby, squatting and smoking while talking loudly on the phone. "I'm at the school. What else could it be?" "Dan's in trouble again," the driver said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Honestly, he better shape up if he doesn't want to piss off the boss and his wife. The second young master is way better at buttering up Mr. Chung than him. Dan's got no future in the company at this rate. He could have had it easy, but no, he's a troublemaker." The driver was gossiping enthusiastically about his master's family. The young Master Chung he mentioned must have been Dan. It seemed Dan wasn't as glorious as he appeared. His father didn't love him, his mother didn't care, and he had a younger brother competing for the family inheritance. Now he was trying to seek warmth from his biological mother and vent his frustration on me. Serves him right. I glanced at my mom. She didn't seem to have heard the driver's words, her expression unchanged. Soon, the van driver came over and moved the van. As we were leaving, I saw Dan following Bunny out of the school building. Mom drove past them without a second glance. The atmosphere in the car was strange. I glanced at my mom in the rearview mirror and couldn't help but look again. She smiled softly. "Go on, say what's on your mind." "Mom," I whispered, "how did you feel seeing Dan today?" "I didn't feel much," she sighed. "Honestly, I was surprised at how calm I was. I guess the pain he caused me has been healed by you. So, there's nothing left to feel because I don't care anymore. But he can't bully you. If he does, I'll be angry. If you ever get bullied again, you must tell me. We can always transfer to another school." She reached over and patted the back of my hand. "Don't worry, darling. You're my only child now, my only treasure." I stared at her, feeling a lump in my throat. My eyes stung. At the same time, I couldn't help but laugh at Dan in my heart. How many chances do you get to win back someone you didn't cherish? As for my mom, I'm going to cherish her forever. 9. Dan apologized to me in front of all the teachers and students that day. The school installed cameras throughout the building and cracked down on bullying. The Cheng family compensated me, and Dan was suspended for half a semester. His family sponsors the school, so he wasn't expelled. My mother explained the light punishment. "I wanted to call the police, but he's your half-brother. A criminal record could affect your future civil service exams." I reluctantly accepted the explanation and hoped Dan would leave me alone. But a week later, I saw Dan at school again, wearing a short-sleeved shirt and jeans, standing at our classroom door. When he saw me, he awkwardly walked over and extended his hand, revealing a small cake. "Here, this is for you," he said. I stared at him coldly. "Want to poison me?" "I didn't poison it. I just wanted to give it to you," he replied, unfazed. "I've already apologized. Don't be so stingy." Stingy? He bullied me for so long that I still have scars, and now he dares to call me stingy? I wasn't about to forgive him. I threw the cake into the trash can and walked into the classroom. Dan stood outside for a long time before leaving. He started coming to school daily, bringing me various things: food, toys, even useful items. I handed everything to his class teacher, not wanting any part of it. Finally, I confronted him. "You're trying to repair your relationship with my mother by pleasing me? Dream on. I hate you, and so does she." For the first time, Dan's carefree demeanor changed. His lips tightened, and I saw the hatred in his eyes. He was up to no good, just as I suspected. After that, I didn't see him at school again. At the end of the semester, the school organized a summer camp. I hesitated to join, fearing I'd run into Dan, but my classmates reassured me. He's on leave and wouldn't dare show up. So I signed up. But when I arrived at camp, there was Dan, already setting up his tent. My hands went cold. I had been bullied for so long that I felt a wave of PTSD. A classmate tried to comfort me. "There are so many of us here. He wouldn't dare bully you." Dan saw me and waved, smiling. I ignored him and set up my tent as far away as possible. 10. On the first day of camp, something went wrong. My tent was overturned, but nothing valuable was stolen, except for the lunch my mom had packed for me. I only had enough food for the day, so the rest of the time, we were supposed to cook and eat at camp. Looking at the empty lunchbox, I felt confused. Who steals just a lunchbox? My classmates wondered. After the shock, I calmed down and knew who the culprit was. I stormed over to Dan's tent and found him finishing the last bite of my lunch. "Dan, have you no shame?" I grabbed the lunchbox, but it was empty. He had eaten everything. Dan burped and offered me 200 yuan. "Here, I'll compensate you." I slapped the money away. "Who wants your money? My mom made that for me. You can't buy it with money." "Dan, you don't have a mother to cook for you, but I do. Don't touch my food." Dan's smile faded as he picked up the money. "It's just a meal. Is it that serious?" "It is to me," I said, "and you have no right to take anything from me, not my lunch and certainly not my mom." "But she should have been mine." Dan kicked over a stool, furious. "I haven't eaten her cooking in 10 years. What's wrong with me eating one meal? I went to her flower shop every day, but she ignored me. I called and messaged her, but she blocked me every time." Dan collapsed to the ground. "Just because I made a mistake when I was young, she's punished me for so many years. Why?" I was surprised to hear he had been trying to contact my mom, but I didn't feel sorry for him. "You regret it now because your life isn't going well," I said coldly. "If you were happy, you wouldn't care about her. In the end, you're still selfish." 11. The lunchbox incident ended without much resolution. I didn't expect Dan to behave himself or stop causing trouble, but I hoped he would be less of a nuisance. Our summer camp was held at Songrong Mountain, where afternoon activities included a group mountain climb with routes drawn by lot and guided by teachers for safety. At 1 o'clock, my group set off. The mountain wasn't steep, but it was a long trek. Skipping lunch left me tired after a while. I rested at a road sign, letting my team go ahead so I could catch up without slowing them down. The route was well marked, and the area was a popular tourist spot with plenty of staff. After a short rest, I resumed the climb, but the terrain grew denser, and the path seemed to twist and turn. I felt disoriented and tried to retrace my steps, but the way back was unclear. Panic set in when I realized I was lost. My cell phone had no signal in the dense forest. "Is anyone there?" I shouted, but only my echo answered. I could only hope to find my way back by instinct. 12. Despite my efforts, I couldn't escape the forest. My ankle twisted and swelled after tripping over a root. I sat on the ground, waiting silently for help. To my surprise, Dan was the first to find me. His face lit up with an unsettling cheerfulness. "Huh, I found you." Instead of relief, fear gripped me. Dan's presence felt threatening. Alone with him in the forest, I couldn't run, and there was no one to hear my cries for help. I edged away from him, wary. "What do you want?" Dan approached calmly and examined my injured ankle. "Are you hurt?" "It's none of your business." Dan didn't respond immediately, but then surprised me by squatting in front of me. "It's getting dark. Can't you see? I'm going to carry you out." I hesitated, but before I could react, Dan lifted me onto his back. I tensed and struggled. "Why are you moving?" he snapped. "If you keep it up, I'll throw you down and break your other leg too." I froze in fear. Stiffly, I lay on his back as he carried me through the forest. My mind raced. What did he want? Why was he willing to endure the pain of carrying me, his enemy, out of the woods? As we emerged from the forest, teachers quickly surrounded us. "Melody, the road sign must have been blown off course by the wind. That's why you got lost. Quickly, let's get you to the hospital." Dan, looking sheepish, accompanied me to the hospital. After an examination, the doctor confirmed my leg was broken. As the nurse prepared to cast my leg, my mother arrived, anxious and relieved. "Melody, are you okay? Are you hurt?" she asked, rushing to my side. "I'm fine, Mom. I just fell," I reassured her with a smile as they wheeled me away for treatment. Once I was settled, I saw my mother's expression soften as she inquired about Dan. His goal was achieved. My mother was willing to see him. 13. When Abby entered the ward, Dan's wounds of all sizes had been treated. He looked very funny, sitting on the bed playing with his cell phone. Hearing the sound of the door opening, he looked up and then was stunned. Abby closed the door and walked over to him. Dan shouted in disbelief, "Mom?" Abby sighed. "I heard that you rescued my daughter? You bullied my daughter before. I will never forgive you for this." Dan's face suddenly turned pale. "But speaking of the matter, I should thank you for rescuing my daughter today." Dan's brow furrowed, his voice trembling as he asked, "Mom, do you really not recognize me?" Before she could respond, Dan leaped from the bed, rushing to Abby's side. He knelt in front of her, wrapping his arms around her waist with a desperate plea. "Mom, I know I was wrong. I hurt you before, but I was just immature and reckless. Punish me if you have to, but please, don't turn your back on me." Abby looked down at him, a mix of emotions flickering in her eyes. With a sigh, she gently pried his arms from her waist. "Dan, I'm happy now," she said softly, each word sinking deep into his heart. "I have a loving husband and a wonderful daughter. They treat me well, and I'm content with my life. I don't want anything or anyone to disrupt that." Dan crumpled to the floor, the weight of her words crushing him. He realized that, to his mother, he was nothing but a complication, a reminder of the past she wished to leave behind. Abby's gaze softened, but her resolve remained firm. "I don't want to have anything to do with you or your father anymore," she continued. "Some things, once lost or missed, can never be recovered. You need to move on, Dan." As he sat there in stunned silence, Abby couldn't help but offer a final piece of advice. "Since you're James' son, think about your future. Sometimes, showing vulnerability can bring the greatest advantage. The misfortune you blame on others was caused by your father's actions, not my daughter. Don't take it out on her. Leave her alone from now on." 14. My mother took me home. Then I was forced to eat stewed pork bones for several days. After resting at home for almost a week, I was almost exhausted, so I went to school on crutches. As soon as I entered the classroom, My classmates came to help me. They escorted me to my seat and started asking me gossip. Did you hear? Dan went to study abroad. Did he drop out of school? Well, sort of. His family poured so much money into the school, but even that couldn't keep him here. Melody, who's your mom? She's amazing. With their eyes all on me, I pulled a business card from my bag, trying to hide a smirk. My mom's the chief florist at Melody Flower Shop. She's pretty great. Feel free to drop by if you're curious. After that, Dan was gone. I finished junior high and high school without a hitch, aced my college entrance exams, and got into a university I was excited about. The day I left for school in a new city, both my mom and dad came to see me off at the airport. My dad is just an average guy, a programmer with an ordinary background, ordinary looks, and a straightforward personality. But his love for my mom and me? That's something extraordinary. As we stood at the gate, my mom handed me a bouquet. I wrapped these this morning, she said with a smile, wishing my daughter a bright future. With the flowers in hand, I turned to wave goodbye, then took off, ready to embrace whatever came next. During the summer vacation of my junior year, I helped out at my mom's flower shop. My sense of aesthetics wasn't as sharp as hers, so I mostly handled the basics, waking up the flowers and taking orders. One evening, as we were getting ready to close, I noticed a bouquet that hadn't been picked up. Curious, I checked the order but found no name or number. With my mom out running errands, I asked one of the older employees who was still in the shop. She glanced at the bouquet and nodded knowingly. Ah, that one? Just leave it there. Every year around this time, someone orders lilies, but no one ever comes to collect them. She added in a low voice, the payment always comes through quickly though. Otherwise, we'd think it was some kind of prank. Lilies. I paused, then asked without thinking, what's the flower language of lilies? The clerk thought for a moment before replying, a sincere apology and a pure heart. As we talked, my mom returned from her errands. I walked over to her, curious. Mom, what did you get? She handed me a bag with a smile. Your favorite flower cake. Without hesitation, I hugged her and planted a kiss on her cheek. You're the best, Mom. She chuckled, gently pushing me away. You're an adult now. Stop being so clingy. The clerk, watching us, smiled warmly. You two have such a great relationship. The evening was settling in as we finished packing up the shop. Just before leaving, I pointed to the bouquet of lilies still sitting on the table. Mom, aren't you going to take those flowers home? She turned to look at them, a soft smile playing on her lips. No need, she said, shaking her head. We've already got plenty of flowers at home.